All right. Hey, welcome to my YouTube channel again. I am really excited to have a good friend of mine, Nicole Fisher, is with me today. Nicole and I, we met when our churches did a partnership back. It was a 3-year deal. Our group from Sunny Slope Church here in Salem, we went out to Philadelphia, where Nicole is from, and we partnered with their church a little bit and did a business boot camp thing. Now, Nicole, I went digging through my attic and I found my BBC boot camp shirt
Yes.
back from 2012. I found some pictures too, but I'm not going to put those up right now. But then Nicole and a group from Philly came over by us the following year, and you guys helped us with our VBS, and we got to know your team a little bit here. And then we went back in 2014, so we've kind of had this 3-year partnership, and then we haven't connected since then. But I've asked Nicole to join me today because on the last episode that I did, I talked a little bit about how human nature is such that we tend to identify most with people who are similar to us. And so that's culturally, racially, ethnically, that's sort of, I think, our default setting. And what I wanted to do is hear from someone who has who's from an African-American community. And I want to hear Nicole share just a little bit about some of how you have perceived some of the events of the last couple weeks, couple months, and we're just going to kind of talk about some of your experiences. And so, Nicole, I'm going to let you just introduce yourself, say whatever you want to say, and then we'll just kind of get into some of this. And so, and again, thank you so much for jumping on the channel and being part of this. So take it away.
I just want to say, hey, thank you, Pastor Rob. I really appreciate the ability to be here today. I'm like excited. I've got a bunch of notes, but I promise I'm not going to go through everything. I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget things, and the teacher in me needs things in order. So, well, like I said, I'm a teacher. I've been teaching for 16 years, just finished year 16. Most of that year was done, of course, remotely, but you know, we survived. And I have, as Pastor Rob said, been born and raised in Philly all my life. And I, grew up a Christian. Grew up in the Black church, and was really kind of excited when I attended by grace alone, which was a more diverse church, because I do believe that's how God sees the body of Christ. He sees all of our colors. So it was really nice to have that experience. And I grew up, in a Black church, but it was just nice to be experiencing other cultures and learning from different environments and having that experience. So yeah, and currently the last part about me in my life, I recently became a foster mom. So, it was just something that was God led, of course, because I, just being single and just trying to do the teaching thing really became burdened with the students that were coming in my classroom who were from, just environments that a lot of them were going through the foster system. And I could tell that, man, if I could just make a difference in one, it maybe, and I began going through that process. And, officially, I actually do have my first daughter, and she's 13, and she's been with me now for 4 months. And unfortunately, it's been a different experience because she came to me right at the coronavirus. So that experience has, of course, been life altering in a good way, and in some ways where I'm being stretched and pushed, and definitely prayer.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's
awesome.
That's me. Hi guys, I remember some of you, so hopefully you're watching. Miss you.
Yeah. Some of them are definitely going to be watching this. So maybe you could start by just telling us about some of your experiences, because I think sometimes there may be a tendency for a person like myself to downplay the realities and the difficulties of discrimination, right? We say, well, that's, maybe it's not such a big deal because we don't experience it. But as a person, so you're an African-American person, can you maybe share about experiences that you may have had where you've been on the receiving end of discrimination or racism? Maybe just talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Yeah, sure. And I also wrote down things so that I can get through it.
Yeah.
Because it is very emotional. It is life altering. So my first experience I had with being called the N-word. I was about 8. I actually don't remember exactly, but I know that my family and I, we always go down to Florida. My dad's side's from Florida, and we were out, early evening, taking a walk after dinner. And I remember a pickup truck driving by and yelling at us, the N-word, and, and just driving and honking. And it was scary in that moment. And I didn't know how to process it. I remember my mom and my cousins kind of, yelling things back at them. But I didn't understand or really connect like what was happening. And that was my first experience with it being blatant. I'm gonna say blatantly said, because as time went on, I began to have it happen more, not so openly, right? So in 6th grade, I remember it was the oratorical contest for speeches. And I wrote a speech. And in the speech, I began, because I was learning different things and I was reading on my own about, Rosa Parks and understanding more about what racism was. And I wrote a speech about how these things were kind of still happening even then. And I'm a child of the 80s. So we were part of the busing, minorities into white communities to integrate the schools, because we began to see during that time of segregation, right? So that was a big history of the United States trying to reintegrate the schools. So I was one of the kids bussed in. And so my school was predominantly white, except for the couple buses that brought students of color into the school. And I wrote this speech about, racism happening, and we have to pay attention, and we have to see this. And I just remember throughout the speech, I kept saying, we have to wake up to see this. We have to wake up and rise. And I got to the part when I used the example of seeing images of a white Jesus. And I said, we see him with blue eyes and blonde hair. And I referenced the scripture in the Bible where it talks about him having feet of bronze and hair like wool. Well, I thought the speech was great. My parents thought it was great. And I came in 6th place. And it really bothered me because I've always been like a perfectionist and I didn't understand. And my mom, and they tried to explain to me, who was on the panel. And I was like, miss this one and miss, and, right, all the white teachers. And I was like, just didn't really process it. But my parents then took me to, churches and Black churches that I, grew up in. And I was getting standing ovations. And that was a turning point in my processing of understanding there's something not right here, right? Like, I knew the speech was good. It wasn't received this way. They put me in 6th place. And I watched peers that I don't remember their speeches being this, powerful and impactful. And even the person who won, and yet I'm getting standing ovation at these churches. Like, what's going on here? And just being a processor, I began to think about what is happening here. And unfortunately, as a teacher, I've experienced it. Not even really as much from my students, as much as from other teachers and from parents. So having those experiences have really been difficult. The biggest one that happened this school year before coronavirus, I was teaching. I was standing in front of the room teaching. And I had another teacher, a white 4th grade teacher there to observe me in this lesson. And so she's sitting there taking notes. I'm teaching. A lady walks in and she's come to work with kids. And she starts talking to the teacher, asking that teacher, where was this student in my classroom? She's asking this teacher, where, and the lady's looking at her confused, like, and she's like, this is Miss Fisher's class. And it was like, she finally sees me like, oh, I'm sorry. And
right.
That, and for me, it's like, what else do I need to do but put a shirt on? I am the teacher here. Like, I didn't understand. And that, unfortunately, is not the first time that's happened where people walked in and thought I was the classroom assistant. I've had parents ask, are you the teacher assistant? Are you, here to help with, Miss So-and-so's class? And I'm like, no, I am Miss Fisher.
Right.
And, teachers also just, having, and I'm talking recent, I'm talking this year, in a few years that I've been at different schools where, teachers, at one point, teachers in Philadelphia district, we used to have like a race balance thing where teachers needed to be, you had to meet the certain quota to have so to speak, the teachers theirs of color.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember coming to my new school excited, and I'm like, hey, you know, and a teacher walked up to me and he said, if it comes to you and I having to be let go from the school, I'm going to fight for my position. And I was like, okay. And he literally walked over to the other teachers that were all white, and he said, I wish I was Black. And, you know, by this point, I unfortunately I'm used to it. I'm used to hearing these kind of comments. I'm used to experiencing these things, and it's not correct. It's not right, and it bothers me. But how do you begin that conversation? You know, unless you have the space to do it. So I just again thank you for this opportunity, because you know, it sometimes isn't believable.
Well,
you know,
yeah, that's right. And I think I'm really glad, because you brought out kind of two aspects there, right? So there's the really overt guys in the truck that drive by when you're in Florida and call you the N-word. Like that's horrific. It's very blatant. It's very obvious. And most people would look at that and say, okay, well, that's racism. And they would condemn that, right? I think most people. But then there's the subtle side that you bring out, and it was interesting because so Brian Stevenson, the Just Mercy guy, I watched a thing about him last week, and he tells a story where he's a lawyer and he's in court, he's in his suit, and he's an African American guy, and he's there to represent a client, and he's sitting at the table, and the judge walks in and sees just him sitting and he kind of yells at him and says, what are you doing in here? You can't be in here without your lawyer. And it's like, well, what more do I need to do to show that I'm a lawyer? He's dressed in a suit. And so it's those assumptions that people make that a person of color is probably not going to be in a position of leadership or authority. And it's maybe not even malicious in the intent, right? I mean, it's not that it's not that overt racism, but it's just more the assumptions that kind of people make by default, almost, that reflect something of our broken and fallen nature, I think.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
Yeah.
And just being called out on it, I think it's important that we recognize that these are the things that are happening. And I think about the question, and again, these are teachers who are working with children of all different races. And I remember coming and hearing, you know, it's new to a school that I'm excited about going to, and saying, I don't see color, right? I don't, I see all children as equal. And that statement in itself is a problem, right? Like, we have to see color, because when you ignore someone's color, when you ignore the differences that they bring, you're ignoring that there is this inequality. You're saying that we're all on the same, and we're not. We're all different.
So when you say, because I think that's really crucial, again, because the whole idea of, well, we don't see color, it sounds, in some ways it sounds very nice, right? It sounds kind of politically correct, but you're saying, I think, that that's more problematic than not. Can you say a little bit more why is that an issue?
Yeah, because that means then that you're not paying attention to being different is great. There isn't anything wrong with being different. My differences allows me to bring something to you that you may not have. It sounds, it's almost as if it's a way to say I'm not racist. I don't, but I want you to see my color. I want you to see that I'm different. But to see it in a positive way. It's not something that is there to intimidate you or to make you feel inferior. It's there to show we can all be in this environment and thrive together. It's important because especially in an education setting, just from a teacher standpoint, it means then that you acknowledge that I have a culture that you may not be familiar with, but you're going to be willing to share it with the class, and we're going to be willing to have that conversation here.
So let me follow up on that, because I love what you're getting at there, which is you know, the cultural distinctions, and this is true, of course, not just for Black and white, but, you know, Hispanic and Asian, right? I mean, and it's all created, culture is something that God created and God intends. And what is it that you, what is it about your culture, about African-American culture, that you want people to see? What are the cultural things that you know, that the differences that would be really valuable that you want other people to know about?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. Just I think, and I want to say, I do think that our music is embraced, right? We love you. Our sounds are lovely. Our colors, we're colorful. Oh, that's beautiful. But when it comes to our injustices and the things that rub us wrong, then we don't want to see color. We'll see it when it comes to the music and, you know, I dress and, oh, I love your hair and how you do this. But if we start bringing up, you know, our Black men are being, you know, treated in, what's the word I'm looking for, are being treated unfairly by the police system. Oh, no, we're not. That's not true. We're all treated. All lives matter, right? Like, no, that's not. Yes, but it is. So we can identify with the things that are beautiful and lovely about being Black. But when it comes to the things that make us recognize our pain and see, then as a society, no, we don't want to address that. No, we're past that. That's history.
Right.
That's not, I'm not like that. I have plenty of Black friends. That can't be, no. And I want people to see that racism is alive, and it's coming out in our implicit biases and in our microaggressions towards Black people, and right now in this moment towards, you know, Black men in particular with the police officers. That's a fact. That's happening. And when we begin to talk in that sense, then it's no, that's not. Come on, cops. There's this Black cops. Come on, there's Black on Black crime. Come on, you know, this is no. Right now, I want to talk about this part, this injustice that's happening. We can get to all the rest later, but right now, this is what I need you to see. And when it comes to that, I feel people shut down. I feel like then more of the comments come from, you know, I'm not like that. I don't see it that way.
Right.
You know, I don't want to be a part of that. No, that's not happening. Oh, it's on the news again. Oh, come on. You know, oh, why all lives matter, right? This when these statements start coming out, then you feel, oh, okay, then you don't see me.
So let me, I just want to land on that for a minute, because I got a couple questions that kind of come to mind. When you watch these videos that have come out of Black people being mistreated at the hands of police and in some cases dying, how do you see that? And what does that do to you? What goes through your mind?
I have not watched the George Floyd video. I won't watch it. It is a trigger for me because I immediately think of all the Black men that are in my life. And I began to think about my Black students, my boy students who, you know, this is what they're seeing. And I know how I was shaped and molded from the incidents that happened to me as a child. And what is this doing to them psychologically? What are they beginning to think about cops and how this is happening? So I already know what the video shows. I already know what's happening, right? And I don't need to see another one. But what I do need to see is more, you know, more support and less of, you know, people who want to bring up what his life was and who want to talk about George Floyd in this negative way, when the reality is no one said he was a hero, right? Whatever his life was, it was. But how he died in that moment is what we are discussing right now, because he's not the first. And right after we had, you know, Rashard Brooks, another incident where, you know, if any other white male had happened, I have to say it like that, a drunken white male, would not have been led to execution at that point.
Mm.
It would not have happened.
Mm.
There's video footage. There's enough people who have, white men who have records of, you know, DUIs and things, who are alive to speak to that. And he was making a mistake, and that's what it was. It was a mistake. It did not require him to be executed in that moment. And so, yeah, it's tough. It's difficult because it keeps happening. It keeps reoccurring. And yeah, it's it's a lot. Yeah.
It's painful. Yeah. I mean, and when you personalize it by saying, look, this is what it's doing to the relationship between police officers and, say, the boys in your 6th grade classroom, and the impression that they're growing up with, and what it's doing, you know, that puts it in a whole different perspective, doesn't it? I mean, it's a very, yeah. So then kind of a follow-up on that, when you hear people, you know, so the Black Lives Movement, and then you hear people that respond, well, all lives matter, or blue lives matter. What's your response to that?
It's right now, it's the same that I've been saying for the past, you know, year with this, you know, until Black Lives Matter, then we can't say all lives matter, right? And that's why we're saying Black Lives Matter. I get it. Yeah, blue lives matter. All lives do matter. But
Sure.
until the Black life matters, then we can't
Right.
move away from that. And
Right.
that's what that statement is saying. We understand that. You know, all lives are important. You know, as a child of God, I know that.
Right.
But right now, until the Black life actually matters, we have to make sure we are clear when we say that Black lives matter.
Yeah. So let's that kind of starts wheels turning in my mind. So how, because there's different ways that people have of addressing these issues, right? And we've kind of touched on some of them, which is like, well, you know, we don't see color, right? That kind of that mantra that we should just downplay. And I think that's although I could be wrong, that was sort of an older approach that we don't take that much anymore. I think people are starting to recognize, okay, that's not going to quite do it. But then there's other ways. I mean, there's people who protest. There's people who get, you know, they demonstrate, or they make statements. Are those efforts at trying to address racism, are they effective? Are they not effective? What's your take on that?
Yeah. Well, you know, of course, there's positive and there are some negative ways that people have been trying to have their voices heard, right? So when we think about the protesting, I'm in total agreement. That's, you know, our right, our constitutional right to be able to protest, right? And so I stand totally behind that. I've attended a few. My cousin is a part of one that happens every Tuesday until Election Day. And so that is part of change, right? Like, that's the things that will make a difference. And I do think it's mattering. It requires a few moments, even people who were, you know, kneeling for the 9 minutes that,
Right.
you know, the knee was on George Floyd's neck. And it is blocking traffic, right? For those few moments of inconvenience, you have to realize that is making an impact, right? Because people don't like to be inconvenienced. And so that's what protesting does. It creates this inconvenience for people, and it's making people pay attention. I mean, the world, because of this, the world has, you know, this is gaining momentum around the world.
It's calling attention to it, right? And it's sort of raising the profile of the issue.
Yes. So, you know, protesting and just calling it out when you see it. You know, we all have our, you know, group of friends and our private moments. And when those conversations, you know, happen, we have to be bold enough to say that's not funny. That's not appropriate. You know, I you know, of course, teaching, I had an experience where a parent came to my grade partner, and said to her, "Oh, my son, he came home with such a funny joke. He asked me, what do you call a person who lives next door, and their names, and it starts with an N and end with an R?" And my partner looked at her and she was like, "What?" And she was like, "A neighbor." And she's like, "Isn't that clever?" And in that moment, that teacher's responsibility was to call her out on that, right? In that moment. So we can no longer feel, you know, the side laugh. We have to begin to call it out when we see it happening,
Right.
and let people know that that's not appropriate and it's not
Right.
funny. because our students are watching. The N word is a big deal in my school, where children are saying it, and I'm looking like, whoa, 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 what is going on around here? And I'm of all colors, and I'm like, well, you know, we hear it in the songs. Oh, we hear this. Right. Let's look at the history of this word. Let's just sit down and discuss if this is something that's appropriate. Because now, you know, when one student finally, it was stated that it was not in an appropriate way. Now we want to have outrage. But it has to always be outrage with that word, right? Like, we can't have outrage when we think, oh, you're saying it, I don't like you, so you don't get to say it. No, no, no. No one should be using that word because of the history and context of it. So, you know, just
and that's a very small and tangible thing, right? I mean, addressing and responding, rather than responding by laughing at a joke and just kind of brushing it off, is saying, you know, hey, you might not have intended it that way, but this is it's hurtful, or it's, you know, it's perpetuating a stereotype or whatever. That's a small thing that people can do to just, you know, not to show that it's not okay to, you know, make jokes or casual remarks about people of color.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Of any group of people. And it's just, it's really just big, and it's important, and education comes with that. When I think about what we can do, how do we begin to change this? Well, first we got to educate ourselves. So I wrote down a couple books that came to mind. I picked the children's book because I think these conversations have to happen with our youth.
Right.
And I actually did this with my classroom, and I know the book is a bit young, but I do think, you know, all ages, maybe 6 through maybe 15, depending on, you know, your comfortability with your child and the level. This book is called Something Happened in Our Town, and it's a child's story about racial injustice. It is an amazing book. It does have a study guide that comes with it to, you know, create conversations that and questions for children. That's by Ann Hazard, Marianne Solano, and Marietta Collins. And I can email it to you if you want that.
Yeah, if you do that, then I can put a link in the description of the program, and then we can.
A great book. I don't own, you know, I don't get any monies or anything from it. It's just something, as a teacher, I was looking for resources for my students, especially after George Floyd, and we were still in school, and I had to explain to them I couldn't come on one day because I was so angry I couldn't even talk. Like, I didn't want to have conversations about it. So I wanted to share that with them, and we had a really great conversation around it because the book deals with a Black man who's shot by the cop, right? And this whole it's two families, a Black family and a white family, and what the conversations are like in those homes. And it's a really incredible and appropriate, child appropriate way to have that conversation, because they hear the news, they're hearing our conversations, so they need to be educated, right? We want them to take an educated stance on what's happening, and what do I do. And the adult book that I'm currently reading, I'm in a book club now, it's called The New Jim Crow Era. I didn't grab the author. Anya, can you grab me that book under the table for me? And it really is a great book on what she's referring to in here. Under this table. The table. Yeah. Both of them. Sorry. So it's a really great book that kind of deals with this new thought around this new Jim Crow era that we're in, and looking at the incarceration of Black men. And so this is actually the book. It's by Michelle Alexander, by the way.
Okay.
I actually have the older version. There's a new book out apparently, the 10-year anniversary of it, that actually talks more about, she has a great introduction into the new one that talks more about the things that are going on currently. So it's definitely an update on that.
Okay, got it.
Yeah, and I got good with it. So, and if you don't like reading, right? Like I wanted to cover, you know, as a teacher, I went to all modes because I'm like, listen, we got to get this. Netflix has a documentary called 13. It actually is a spinoff of the new Jim Crow. The author is actually on there. Michelle Alexander is actually kind of commentaries on that documentary. Of course, you mentioned Just Mercy, another great film. And for younger audiences, The Hate You Give. was a great movie, I thought, and dealt with the young lady experiencing going to a school, again, integrating into a predominantly white school, and what it was like to come home to her hood every day, right? And experiencing what that was like for her. So another, just a few movies and books that when we begin to educate and read and see beyond Dr. King and beyond Rosa Parks, and really dig into the rich history of African Americans in the United States, you gain a sense of, you won't feel like those statements you're saying are appropriate. I don't see color.
Right.
I treat everyone the same. You begin to really, see why that statement doesn't make sense.
Right. So that kind of leads me into a question I wanted to ask, following up on something you said at the beginning, which was when you were introducing yourself, you talked about being a part of a Black church and then being part of By Grace Alone, which is a little more multicultural. Tell us a little more about, because I'm just kind of curious about the difference when you, so you're looking at a Christian, you're trying to think through what does a Christian approach to all this look like? And you talk about a Black church, which is kind of, in that sense, it's very defined by its African-American history and culture and the music. But then you're also saying that a multicultural church, that was a better experience for you. Maybe, at least, maybe you could say a little bit more about why.
Because it helped me realize that the church is just a building, right? Like, I am the church. So if I'm coming into this building, I shouldn't have to see this as, this is where Black people go, right? This is where the white people go. This is where, the rich people go, right? Because we also have this thing of classism too.
Right.
And that's beginning to define us in America now. And, you begin to see like, oh, well, when I was at By Grace Alone, I was able to see like people from, all walks of life there, and really begin to see this is what God wants, right? Because he loves all of us, and he didn't separate us by our race or by our finances. He really designed a church and wanted us to be the place where we go and we're sharing the gospel and we're, showing others the way to come to him. It's not even about us.
Right.
And that's what I was able to see there. And it was just an amazing experience that it's not unfortunately happening in many churches across the United States, where on Sunday it's the most segregated day, where we go to our places of worship and it's a predominantly one color.
Right. And I'm glad you brought that out, because it is not just a white or Black, but it's, Hispanic or Asian. And some of that is born out of necessity, right? So you get, for example, you get a Hispanic church if people in that church don't, say, speak English, because they're new to the country and stuff. So some of that is just out of necessity. But then, and it happened in my own tradition. The church that I grew up in was a Dutch immigrant church, right? And so they had all just come over from Holland. They all still really only spoke Dutch mostly. But then what happens is it's like we never sort of fully break out of that. And I think what you're saying is that can be true for whatever background you're part of. It's not necessarily, just a white thing or Black, but it's, Hispanic, Asian, Latino, etc. So then my question, because what you're painting a picture of is something that really is remarkable. And it's an expression of what the gospel is, which is God's idea for the church is many tribes, tongues, nations, peoples, and languages all together, right? My question is, so in a church like Sunny Slope, we're in a city that's mostly white. We do have a couple of Hispanic pockets. We do not have a very large African American population. We have, some Hispanic people. What would you say to us that would be a good thing for a church like Sunny Slope to, strive towards or work towards? What would you say to our church?
It's hard. I would say, when you can, it can't be forced. It just has to happen naturally, right? The goal is not to go out and find the next person of color to try to, okay, come with me. I'm gonna, that right. You want it to be authentic. You want it to be something that just kind of naturally happens. And until then, because there are some, I'll say that too, like from a Black point of view, we are more comfortable among, our people are like, look like us, people who talk like us, you know, worship like us. It is a comfort there. And so really just being open to if someone is coming and, you know, trying to, you know, be a part, but not, I don't know how to say, like, I'm just thinking about, I know, like, an example would be, we saw in the news how the Democratic Party all put on like kente cloth and they took a knee and during one, and, you know, it kind of, you know, I don't think that's what Black people want, right? We appreciate it, thanks, but like, so my point is, I don't think, you know, now you see this one Black person that's coming, like they want to come see your church and experience it. That doesn't mean now you go and, you know, you're changing all your music up and you're adding, look, we've got all the, you know, and now everybody's wearing braids all of a sudden. And it's like, yeah, that's awkward, right? Like,
Yeah.
just being yourself and just realizing, like, I am a white person. I understand, I recognize that I have this white privilege that you speak of, right? But the love of God in my heart sees you for who you are and how God made you. And because of that, our differences can come together and we can worship, and you can share some of your experiences and I can share mine, and we can give it all to the glory of God.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you for saying that, because I think that expresses really well some of the tension that I've wondered about too, is because sometimes these, you know, I don't know if you ever watched Seinfeld, but there was that episode where, you know, George, for whatever reason, he felt like he had to impress, you know, an African American boss, and so he goes out and he's trying to do all these things that end up looking really condescending and really patronizing. And I think sometimes that's sort of maybe the way that we approach it, is like we think, and it becomes very artificial, right? It's like I need to have my excuse the phrase, my token Black friend, right? And that's not what real reconciliation or real racial harmony is really about. I mean, I guess the phrase that comes to my mind is just having this sort of holy curiosity about different cultures and saying, okay, you know, how do you, tell me about your culture, tell me about your perspective, how do you look at this issue? Let's learn from each other. And, you know, no, we're not going to all of a sudden have to feel like we have to change all of our music so that it's, you know, African American spirituals, but, you know, we want to learn from you, we want to hear from you, we want to include you. So you're not seeing color, but you are, maybe that's not quite the right way to put it. You recognizing there's a cultural difference, but you're not going to be patronizing to it either, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So. Absolutely. And it's a fine line, and it comes from just having those experiences, you know, and it has to be genuine. And I will say, like, when I came, and I know one of my girlfriends came with me, and another member, just speaking from the Black perspective, it was awkward in moments. I know we went out one day to do like the flyers for coming, and it was like, oh, we don't go knocking on white people's doors. This is not, I just remember, like, we don't do this, like, this is not good. And but after we go through that, because that is one reality that, you know, a lot of minorities, especially in you know, you go in different places, we tend to be the minority. So we get used to being and adjusting. And I think that is different and difficult for some white people, because you're not usually the minority.
Right.
And so when you get to see that, you know, I challenge, you know, if you haven't had that experience where you're the minority, to maybe try to find a situation where you can be, not to go in and try to, you know, do anything, but just, can you put yourself in a situation where in that moment you're the minority, and just get a sense of how that feels. You know, try to get to a Black church, see how, you know, because we can be weird too in the church, like, oh, there's a white person here, oh my goodness, hey, you know, and it is awkward in the beginning to have that feeling, but when you see how genuine people are, which is what I did get from your church when we came, when you begin to see, it kind of allows you to relax a little bit. You do come in a little like, okay, I don't know, you know, I don't know if I should show them all of me. Let me just be a little, you know, quiet. Let me see what's happening. Let me observe. And we saw the love that you all showed us. We felt it. And you know, did push us and make us feel awkward in those kind of situations. Like, wait, we don't go knock on doors. No, 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 no. That's not in Philly. That don't work that way, right? So just seeing those moments and having them is a part of the experience. And I challenge, anyone who hasn't had that experience. And children are the biggest. They're the biggest truth of what kind of home you have. How children react to me, white children, I can tell how many Black faces they've seen in their life. And I mean, not just on TV, I mean, really where their families have had interaction with people of color. I can tell because they're really a bit confused, right? Like it's almost like whoa, it's a real life Black person here. Whoa, what? Right. But you can see it, I can tell, even my neighbors, I can tell like, oh, hi, how are you? It's more the children will speak for what's happening in your home and what conversations you're having. What kind of materials do you have in your home? Is there, a combination of books in the home and movies we're watching, or is it all predominantly one race, one thing? This is what we do. Are we embracing other things? When Black History Month comes around, what's being talked about, right? What's happening? And that's a challenge I have for, educators and pastors, and just what are we doing when moments come and rise up? Are we doing like what you're doing and trying to encourage a conversation, or are we saying we don't really have to deal with that here, it's not it's kind of taboo, we don't really talk about that here, and it's important. So
that's great. Thank you, Nicole. I want to give you a chance. If you have anything you want to add or any other topics you want to touch on, I want to give you a minute or two or three to do that before we wrap up.
Let me think. I'm just going to look at my notes really quickly. I just kind of spoke on, I know I said that before, but, really, this is what I will say. It's possible that someone who's seeing this may have thought, before, well, all lives matter, right? Or they may have had a problem with Kaepernick taking a knee. And that's okay. If you felt that way, and now being enlightened here from this conversation, or just from beginning to read and expose yourself, you're having a different view. It's okay now to say I was wrong about my thoughts about that. And I'm realizing now what Kaepernick's protest was for. Or, understanding, hopefully we see now just even what our president has been doing, and, originally what the history behind Tulsa is, understanding why that him having that on Juneteenth was a problem, familiarizing yourself with what Juneteenth is, right? I'm having this conversation with my own parents. So this is, it's nothing that I was taught in school. This is coming from me saying it's time for me to do better in what I understand about the history of America. Not just Black America, but this is the history of America. If you're having a problem with statues being removed, or, conversations around why they're wanting to change names on buildings all of a sudden, why are you erasing our history? No, we're correcting where history went wrong. And we're making this a better place for where our children need to grow up. So we're done with this cycle. It's been too many hundreds of years that this has been going on. This is not new. It's just, it's a change and shift of how we're looking at it. And that's why I just challenge, if now hearing this conversation and thinking about it, you now begin to see a little better, it's okay to say, I can understand and I appreciate where I was wrong, and I'm working to make a difference.
It's sometimes the hardest thing to say, right? Is to admit that, hey, we were wrong, but it's part of growth, right? To be able to acknowledge our mistakes and our failures and our, even our ignorance, right? Because sometimes it's not, it's just, hey, I didn't ever look at it that way, but now I've heard from some people and now I just see it differently. It's a hard thing to do that, but it's a necessary thing, I think, is to be able to.
Absolutely. So. Absolutely. Yeah. That's all I would say. I just appreciate your time. Thank you for this platform.
Thank you. Yeah, Nicole, it was really good to just catch up with you again, for one thing, but also just to have this conversation and to maybe provoke some thought, and just encourage people on how do we look at these matters and these issues. And so I really just appreciate you, taking the time and sharing your thoughts and your perspective on this. So thank you so much. It's, I know people that watch this are going to really appreciate it. So
Oh, I
thank
hope
you.
so. Thank you.
So.